Welcome back, everyone. We are lined up next with James Hare, and he's going to talk all about patching, something many of us on the beer farmers are very passionate about. So take it away, James.
Hi, I'm James Hare, and so I can get this actually started here. All right, so I've worked in information technology for about 20 years. I started in 1997 working as a help desk guy for a regional internet service provider, and worked my way up through a number of positions. I now work as a systems management expert, primarily doing government contracting with federal and state governments here in the United States. I've done some consulting with private business, primarily in government at this point. When I am not patching systems, I try to do a lot of snowboarding. And then in the off season, I like to bicycle, hike, and camp. And since we're talking about beer, I really love beer. My favorite beer is an American beer called Heady Topper from a little brewery called The Alchemist. If you ever get a chance to go to Vermont, great spot in Stowe, Vermont. So just to start off, a little bit of an idea of why we patch. So one of the bigger ones for me, just looking at it, is the Maersk Line incident in 2017. This is a ransomware incident where they got hit with the NotPetya ransomware. That ransomware made use of the Eternal Blue exploit that was a wonderful invention of the NSA that was disclosed by the shadow brokers around March 2017. It was immediately patched by Microsoft. But then even in June 2017, 3 months later, we see it being successfully exploited to cause over 300 million in losses. It took down Maersk shipping, I think, for two or three days. So a very serious incident. Just last year, Baltimore City in Maryland got hacked with the exact same malware, exact same Eternal Blue exploit. The city ended up paying over $18 million in remediation costs. And the folks who did the after action audit made it very clear that by not patching their systems for over 2 years, they basically left their door open to an attack by just about anybody. It didn't take a heck of a lot of skill to use Eternal Blue in May of 2019 to exploit a system. And then finally, we've had a real uptick in Ryuk ransomware attacks in September and October of 2020. One of the more recent ones here in the United States was United Health Services got hacked. They haven't really given a lot of information, but Ryuk has previously used IE and Acrobat vulnerabilities that were patched a very long time ago. So these incidents show that patching is something that you got to do it. You will get caught with your pants down if you don't. And when you open a support call with just about any vendor, one of the first questions they're going to ask is, are you up to the current patch level? So it's something you need to pay attention to, not just for these incidents, but also to make your life easier if you need support. The rate of vulnerabilities has been increasing every single year. In 2017, there were 6,447 CVEs. The next year, the rate more than doubled. And we've had steady increases each year. This year, in October, we already have 15,209 publicly disclosed CVEs. So there's, I believe the number I read 2-3 years ago was 50 or more discovered a day. Obviously, that number has increased quite a bit. Just looking in the Windows world, this is the last 3 months. October 2020, CVE 2020-16-898. This allows remote code execution just by transmitting a specially formed IPv6 packet. And that's present in every single current release of Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019. The 16947 is an Outlook bug, allowing for RCE if you get a specially crafted email. September, 16875 is an Exchange flaw that allows for RCE with a now formed email. I know a lot of people aren't doing their own Exchange anymore, thanks to Office 365 and other hosted services. But here we go. If you're hosting your own email, you might be looking at this. And then 1210 is a SharePoint vulnerability where a specially crafted application package could cause remote code execution on your SharePoint server. And finally, in August, we had 2020-1472, which was the zero logon flaw, which sounded really interesting. I haven't actually seen any information about it being exploited in the wild, but another issue where authentication is basically useless on a single computer. And finally, this 1380 is a flaw in Internet Explorer, which is still out there, still on every Windows 10 computer. And this allows for RCE when you get to it's a drive-by RCE from any web page. So it's not just that we have a large number of vulnerabilities, they are very, very serious. Allowing for remote code execution puts you in real serious problems, especially when chained with a privilege escalation attack. You can get a wormable malware very easily with just a couple of these vulnerabilities. So that's why we patch our systems. So the patch cycle, at least as we do it here, it is really a three-step process, but each step is going on continually. The first step is discovery, where we're identifying any new or old vulnerabilities in our environment. We are assessing our inventory and discovering new systems, and we're researching that inventory, and we're researching what's out there patch-wise to determine what's needed to mitigate our vulnerabilities. The second step is mitigating those vulnerabilities. I think the most important part of this step is actually testing the patches before they're deployed. While Microsoft and all the other vendors make a real honest effort to test every single thing that's out there, your environment is going to be different than their test environment. You may have custom line of business applications they've never seen. So you need to make an effort to test before you deploy to production so that you don't have issues cropping up after patching. Because one of the biggest issues I've run into in getting systems patched on time is business units requesting that they not be patched at a certain time because they're concerned that patching is going to cause disruption. The only way that you can avoid that issue is to work with your people in ahead of time so that they're not concerned about patches causing issues. Finally, we need to report on how our patching has gone. We have to verify that the mitigation steps have gone properly, but we also need to be aware of how the process has gone so that we can continually improve our process. We want to make sure that we are delivering patches as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, with as few issues as possible, and that means we are continually looking to improve our process. Going into a little bit more detail about discovery. So in a perfect world, every single inventory record in your inventory management system is going to link to a specific user or business owner. I have yet to work at any organization where that's true for every single asset. Some do better than others. But for patching, we need to know as much as possible. We want to know 99.999 or whatever so that we aren't running into systems, either rogue IT assets or assets that didn't get into our management system or whatever. We want to make sure we know those. So we can use our existing data. We may have an Active Directory implementation or other directory implementation that gives us data about our endpoints. We may have antivirus or other systems management tools that will give us information about our inventory. And then again, we may have an inventory management product. We want to make sure that all of those existing data sources agree on what's out in the environment. And we also want to make sure that all of those data sources are updated as new assets come into the environment. And then we also need to do active discovery. Now, in most cases, whatever management tool you're using, may it be SCCM, Tanium, HCL BigFix, Norton, there's so many different ones out there. It's one of the difficulties with this talk. They're all going to have a similar discovery process, and that's going to be usually some kind of ping sweep. I use Nmap a lot for discovery. I've used Landsweeper, and all of the commercial tools are going to use a very similar technique, just pinging everything in the network to try to detect systems, and then doing a little bit of detection based on the response to try to detect what an operating system is, give you a confidence interval about that so that you can determine what to do with any unmanaged assets. The other thing we need to know is that discovery is a constant process. We're not just doing it right before patching. We are continually discovering new systems. We're continually aware of things in our environment. And we want to be sure that we're communicating with other business units who may be adding new PCs, who may be bringing on a new office, so that we're aware of those changes so that we can be prepared to patch them properly. So when we're doing our research, the first thing we have to do is have an up-to-date patching status of the systems in our environment. It's not as important these days with Windows 10 because Microsoft now delivers all of their patches in a cumulative package, but we still need to know what's out there. We still need to know the patching status, and we need to know, especially with those cumulative updates, where we may have to deliver a 1 GB or larger update to a large number of PCs. We may engage in vulnerability scanning. If you've got something like Tenable Nessus, that information can also inform the patching process. One thing I've run into in some of my engagements has been that you may not necessarily be able to trust your patch management product entirely because it may not be aware of all the dependencies involved with a specific vulnerability. So you may find from a vulnerability scanning program that you do have an issue that your patch management program isn't actually identifying. So we want to make sure we're using all of our inputs. We need to make sure that any remedial patching is addressed as soon as possible. Those are your biggest problems. You know, if we looked at the Baltimore City, a real remedial patching program might have saved them from that issue. We need to remember that Microsoft is not the only source of vulnerability or patching needs. Adobe and Google both release patches on Patch Tuesday. Google Chrome very often has security bugs beyond just including Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash, thankfully, will be going away as of December, but that's something where you may need to actually keep in mind that there are some users who may have applications that still use Flash that have not been updated to remove that Flash component. So another thing you need to be aware of while you are researching what's out there is where you may have to exclude systems from patching, where you may have to kind of apply a light glove on very important users or developers who may need their systems in a very stable condition so they don't run into issues with their applications. And that's what we get to, where it's not just about what patches need to be deployed. We need to know what business units need a little bit extra care when we're deploying patches. We need to know maintenance windows. We need to know practices in individual business units. If there's a business unit where they tell everybody, turn off your computer on Friday when you leave the office, that's something you need to be aware of if you're sending a patch package over to that system while they're going to be turning their systems off. So you need to engage not just with the software tools, but also with your personal communications tools, reaching out to stakeholders, reaching out to everybody who's involved in this patching process so that they are aware of what's going on and so that they feel like they have some ownership of it. Because otherwise, if anything goes wrong, they're going to point the finger at you first, even if it has nothing to do with patching. The next step is testing. As I said earlier, I think testing is probably the most important part of your deployment, just from a standpoint of keeping the audience involved. So to do this, we need to be aware of where we need to do extra testing. As I was saying earlier, are there developers or other super users that require specific configurations? I know in one of my engagements, we had developers who needed to have a specific version of the JDK or they couldn't do their job. And we had to kind of tiptoe around them because normally we wanted to update the JDK to the most recent version. And that involves setting up exclusion groups, communicating them and knowing when and where they might be ready for an upgrade so that we were making sure we didn't disrupt their development activities. You need to be aware of any critical line of business applications. You know, just a week and a half ago at an engagement, I found out that we had patched a system with a very important, I believe it was a critical bug for SharePoint, but that critical patch had broken a line of business application on that SharePoint server, and we had to pull it back very quickly. We didn't even know we'd had SharePoint on that server because we hadn't engaged in the kind of research and testing we needed to, so we ran into a problem. Is there a standard system image for your enterprise? In most cases, there should be. So you should have that and be testing against that. Now, if you're capturing an image from a VM, well, you should have a copy of that VM so that you can test against it. We need to be prepared to test as soon as possible. Microsoft releases their patches, I think it's 10 a.m. Pacific time, which isn't really the most convenient time for a lot of folks. Some of the management tools require a little bit of time between the patch release and their actual deployment of the patch in their system. I know Tanium and BigFix at least need that. So you may need to actually use whatever automatic patch capability your patch program has in order to run that test if those patches are being released outside of your normal business hours, which, you know, I assume one Pacific is not normal business hours in the UK. And then finally, when we are testing, we need to make sure that the systems that are used in testing are assigned to users that we can trust to make a report of a problem and to actually make a useful problem report. They don't all have to be IT workers, but we want to make sure we're working with people who will actually test everything they're supposed to do and will get back to us if it's an issue. And finally, the mitigation steps. After we've made sure that we're safe, we want to deploy them to our production systems as quickly as possible. When we're doing that, we need to consider bandwidth usage both within our wide area network of our offices and external network bandwidth. Most of your patch management systems are going to end up downloading stuff into a central store and distributing it. But if you've got a smaller branch office that is served by a T1 link or something even worse, you may need to consider that before you do deployment to ensure that there is a distribution point or some kind of peer-to-peer patching available at that location. We need to make sure that we communicate to the users when patching is going to occur and what their responsibilities are. We need to let users know, we will be patching at this time. Please log off, save your work, whatever you need them to do. If we're going to restart the systems, we need to let them know, because again, the more we communicate with the users, the more we bring the stakeholders into the process, the less problems we're going to have down the line when, you know, if we have an issue, they're ready to report it to us and we're ready to work with them to fix it. Finally, we need to work, once we've done all of this patching, our endpoint should report back their status, and we should report that status back to concerned business units. I know I've got a bunch of server administrators that I send out a patching status report every month. They probably never read it, but it's a good way to make sure that they're aware of what's going on and that everybody is on the same page. And then after we finish our patching status report for 1 month, that is our preliminary input into discovery for the next month. What systems need to be patched, what their current patch status is, and then, you know, where we're going as we move forward. And so for process improvement, this is where we're looking at stuff like, if we've got a severe bottleneck where we've got a business unit where all the systems are not receiving patches in a timely manner, we need to research that, talk to those people, either make process or software changes to support them to ensure that we're not taking a real long time to patch. If we have business units with persistent patching issues, we need to speak to those business units and ensure that their behavior is not causing those issues. As I was saying earlier, you have some instances where even if you've communicated it to everybody, you may have an office where people are told to turn their computers off on Friday night. And with this continuous communication and don't just warn users about patching, we need to be available for comments afterward. You need to be available not just for comments about the patches, but for comments about the process so that people feel that the door is open with the team and they can work with you to make it work for them. We need to follow up about special requests. If you've got developers, very important people, anything like that, follow up with them afterward to make sure whatever software or process changes you put in place actually worked. And you need to make sure, as I've said a bunch of times, that all of our stakeholders are owners of the process. Because if the stakeholders are not owners of the process, they will kick back. And that's when you end up having one group that hasn't been patched for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you're talking to the security incident manager about why that system wasn't patched. And the real reason it wasn't patched was because you hadn't built that trust, you hadn't gotten everybody involved in the process, and you weren't using all the tools that are available to you. Because one of the most important tools available to us as information security professionals is communication. We really do have to be constantly communicating with the people we're working with, because otherwise it's edicts from on high from folks they don't know, instead of helpful suggestions from colleagues they trust. So that's the basics. If anybody's got questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I know this is a little bit conceptual, not as much talking about specific tools. That's mainly because I work with one specific tool and I don't really want to leave things really tied to one tool. I think the process is the same regardless of what you're using. Most of the tools offer the same basics. So really, any questions?
Awesome talk, James. And you spot on. Like, to me, tools are only part of the thing, a very small part of the thing, in my opinion. It's the culture, the process, and all of that that forms the biggest part of it. Tools only just kind of fill in my opinion. So there are
yeah, I see two questions. The first one about managing stuff that can't be patched. You know, I've run into a couple of instances. The first thing is making sure it's properly documented, just because that's important from an auditing standpoint. If you have a system that can't be patched, you need to have every single exception in the world like that completely documented, in line with whatever your internal security procedures are. Here in the States, most of that stuff's written by each company. So it depends a great deal. From a software standpoint, that is a device that needs to be segregated from the network as much as possible, placed in a network segment where it can talk to everything that it needs to and nothing else. And the other thing is to try like heck to get rid of anything that can't be patched, because that device is just waiting to be made a zombie. And then with patch prioritizing, again, it's a little bit easier when you're working in a government space, because the IT security manager tells everybody what they're going to do and they follow it. So patching is the priority that we want it to be. We've had to fight sometimes to try to get patches deployed a little bit more quickly, but generally it's not a big deal of getting everybody in line. In private business, I've found the easiest way to get other business units to accept the priority of patching is really to force them to document any exceptions from the patching policy. Because if they want you to wait 2 weeks, well, then they need to be the one who demonstrates the business reason, and also the people who sign off on it. Because in the end, then any responsibility for that decision to alter your patch program is on them, not you. Because in the end, that's your only way you can really cover your ass, is making sure that exceptions from security policy are documented and that somebody else signs that documentation so it's not on your head.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I did warn you before we started, I had a question. So recently we've seen some articles, and I'm not going to go into who or what, but there have been articles stating that maybe you shouldn't patch, or at least wait weeks before you patch. I think it's more from a consumer point of view, but I think many can still read it in terms of certainly a smaller business. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you've covered some topics, but what are your thoughts on those saying that kind of thing?
You know, it's a challenging question. Working in the government space, there is certainly at least the perception that we are in a much more active threat environment. So there is the impression that things need to be out there quickly. If you had asked me that question this time last year, I think the answer would be a little bit different, because Microsoft really had some serious difficulties delivering patches without serious issues, basically from April till about August or September of last year, and even with very high level Microsoft support, we were running into issues that were causing significant problems in production. I remember one, we had over 1,200 people who couldn't open Outlook because a patch had changed how Microsoft rendered a custom logo in a password dialog. And that was causing Outlook to crash on us because, yeah, a password dialog should definitely crash because an image doesn't load properly. So from a private business, I don't think that there's really any security and obscurity. These guys who are sending out phishing emails aren't really being particularly discriminate about it. The overall cost may be lower from a dollar standpoint, but it's still going to be very disruptive. So as much as possible, you should be patching on the regular schedule that Microsoft is putting out, especially with Windows 10, because if you patch each month, you're delivering a package that's about 200-300 megabytes. If you patch a little bit less, then the deltas may not apply, and then you're delivering a cumulative package, which for the 64-bit versions of Windows 10, that can be, I've seen some, I believe that we're over 2 gigabytes, simply because you got every single DLL for 32-bit, you've got every single DLL for 64-bit that's been updated since the original release. And with some of the like 1607 or I think that's actually EOL, but like 1709, that's been out in the wild for 3 years now. So that's 3 years of patches being delivered in one huge package. So it really depends on your organization, but in almost all cases, you should be pushing to get this stuff out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the way I view it is I'd much rather have an issue, have full control over my data and systems, be able to roll back versus something like TravelX at the beginning of the year. You lost complete control. It took a month to try to regain control.
Well, and Microsoft has made it challenging with delivering everything in a single patch package for Windows. I know back in the past, it was sometimes if you had a .NET package or something else that was causing an issue, you could hold that back, and that's not available anymore. But it certainly is easier to manage. So it's trade-offs.
Yeah, really well put. Yeah, and I noticed you just joined. Do you have anything to add or ask?
I don't think it's really fair because I did come in at sort of the queue part of the questions as I was traveling today on work, and now I'm in sunny Portsdown near Bournemouth on the coast.
Okay. Thank you, James. Thanks for a really informative talk, even to someone like myself who's knows how important patching is, but some really good points on how to make patching better, or the process of patching a lot more seamless and less troubles arising. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for your time.